The chair is still there, covered in dust, facing the same mirror it always did. But the man who once stood behind it hasn't been seen in over 2 years. No witnesses, no noise, just lights left on, clippers still warm, and a half-finished haircut that no one ever came back to claim. They said he walked away, but the truth was buried under the floor the entire time. And the deeper you look, the more the shop begins to whisper back. Because this wasn't just a disappearance. It was something darker. The chair has not moved in 731 days. It sits there, unbothered by time, facing a mirror that reflects nothing but stillness and dust. The leather is cracked now, stretched thin from years of service, and suddenly, abandonment. The headrest, once wiped down after every cut, is stained with memory. Light from the street lamp outside leaks through the blinds in slatted patterns, casting pale lines across the checkered floor. Before we uncover what the barbershop floor was hiding, the name that slipped through sealed files, and the photograph that stitched a ghost into flesh, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These aren't just stories, they're fragments of lives buried in silence and stitched with sorrow. Your support doesn't just help us tell them, it helps us honor them. One click keeps the light on in places the world forgot to look. Thank you. The hum of the city, distant engines, faint shouts. A barking dog passes this shop by, like it no longer exists. Or perhaps it never did. The air smells of talcum and wood polish and the subtle rot of neglect. Hair clippings, just a few, curled and brown, are still trapped in the corners, untouched by broom or time. The countertop is cluttered with the remnants of a daily ritual, a brush hardened with product, a pair of scissors still half open, and a straight razor resting on a folded towel, like a question never answered. And then, of course, there's the chair, heavy, centered, facing forward like it's waiting for something. Or someone. 2 years ago, Malik Turner stood behind that chair every single day. Rain or shine, fade or lineup, no appointment necessary. He worked with a rhythm, clippers in hand, radio low, laughter higher. Children grew up beneath his shears. Men came in before job interviews, after funerals, before dates, after breakups. That chair knew secrets. It soaked in every version of masculinity that walked through that door. But on one spring evening in 2023, the shears stopped humming. The laughter silenced. Malik locked the front door from the inside and vanished before dawn. He was never seen again. People say the chair noticed first. Clients began to gather the next day. Confused. Concerned. The lights had been left on all night. Malik's keys were still in the drawer. His phone sat plugged into the charger. A half-drunk bottle of iced tea sweated on the back shelf. But no Malik, no blood, no break-in, just absence. The police called it unusual, not criminal. Maybe he ran off. Maybe he needed space. They filed a missing person report, but no leads followed. In time, the calls stopped. The flyers yellowed. The shop was sealed. But the chair remained. It became an altar of sorts. People left flowers, a few candles. One child, a boy named Avery, 7 at the time, left a drawing of Malik cutting hair. "Come home," it said in crayon letters. Others were less hopeful. They crossed the street when walking past. They didn't want to look at the window too long, as if the reflection might pull them in, as if the emptiness inside was contagious. Now, 2 years later, the chair still sits where he left it. The mirror offers no answers. The dust doesn't speak. But there's something beneath the silence, beyond the grime, that makes you feel watched. As though the room is breathing. As though the chair remembers everything it witnessed that night, and is waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. Because chairs don't just hold bodies. They hold ghosts. Before he vanished, Malik Turner was the kind of man you didn't need to know personally to feel his absence. On the south side of Chicago, where barbershops are more than places for fresh fades, were their confessionals, courtrooms, comedy clubs, and sanctuaries. Malik was the quiet anchor of it all. He didn't need to raise his voice to command a room. He just had to click on his clippers, nod once, and suddenly, everything slowed down. Malik's shop, Turner's Blend, was tucked between a corner liquor store and an old storefront church with chipped blue paint and a congregation that sang so loud on Sundays you could feel it in the floorboards. His barber shop was open 6 days a week, always by 9 a.m. Even when the streets were still icy from last night's freeze. People came early, not just for the cuts, but for Malik. If he had a line of 5 waiting, he'd still take time to ask about your mama's surgery or your kid's report card. He remembered names, not just faces. And he had a way of making you feel like your story mattered, even if you only had 10 minutes in his chair. Some said he had wisdom in his hands. Others said it was in his silences. There are no recordings of Malik Turner, no long interviews, no social media accounts filled with videos or live streams. He didn't live like that. His legacy was oral, passed on in fragments, in barber chairs across the block, in back porches and laundromats. Ask anyone who sat in his chair, and they'll each give you a different piece of him. A mosaic of memory. Miss Darlene, who ran the soul food spot down the block, still swears Malik talked her son out of gang life with nothing but a haircut and a story about his own brother. She never heard the story herself, but whatever was said, it stuck. Jaden, a teenage boy who used to sweep the floor for free cuts, remembers Malik teaching him how to fix a neckline with nothing but a comb and a steady wrist. He called him Unc. Not because they were blood, but because it felt right. Sometimes Malik didn't say much at all. He'd listen. Let men talk themselves out of anger or into realization. He was a therapist without the diploma, a pastor without the pulpit, a counselor without the clipboard. People cried in his chair, laughed until they couldn't breathe, sat in silence when words were too heavy. He always understood the weight. He never pushed, but he never forgot. Even the streets seemed to bend around him. When kids fought outside his shop, they stopped when Malik stepped out. He didn't yell, just stood there, wiping his hands with a towel, waiting. They scattered like birds, not out of fear, out of respect. So when he disappeared, it wasn't just a man who went missing. It was something larger, a gravitational pull that had kept a fragile part of the neighborhood from spinning out completely. And as the months passed, people began to speak of him differently. In the past tense, but not with closure, with confusion and grief. As if the city itself had swallowed him, and no one knew how or why. His chair is empty now, but his name still echoes quietly, reverently through the streets he tried to hold together with nothing more than clippers and care. It was a Tuesday. Ordinary in every way, except in the ways that matter most, those that only make sense in hindsight. April 12, 2023. The kind of day people remember not for what happened, but because of what they missed. Cloudy sky, wind coming off the lake with a bite, streets damp with an afternoon drizzle. The kind of weather that made the scent of rain-soaked concrete mix with barbershop talc and warm hair clippings. Turner's Blend opened on time, like it always did. Malik was behind the chair, like he always was. The regulars came in early, retired men with nowhere to be but everything to say. One brought him a breakfast sandwich from the bodega next door, egg, sausage, dry toast. Malik took 2 bites, then left the rest sitting in its foil on the counter. Odd, but no one thought much of it. He was distracted, they said later. Not worried, just somewhere else. Around 11, a single mother came in with her twins, both boys wriggling in the seats like they had fire ants in their jeans. Malik laughed, gave them matching low fades, and promised the mother they'd behave at picture day. He winked, she smiled. That was the last time she saw him. Sometime mid-afternoon, a man nobody recognized came in for a walk-in cut. Tall, hoodie drawn tight, didn't say much. Sat in the second chair, waited his turn, even though it was clear he didn't belong. Malik noticed. His demeanor shifted. He glanced at the man often, too often. Still, he cut the next client's hair with practiced calm. The stranger left without getting a cut. By 6:30 p.m., the flow slowed. A high schooler swung by for a cleanup before prom photos. Malik lined him up perfectly, handed him a mirror, and told him to walk like he already belonged in the room. The kid left glowing. A few minutes after 7, the last client of the day walked in, a mechanic named Greg, who worked nearby and came every other week like clockwork. He said Malik seemed tired. Not in body, in spirit. He didn't crack any jokes, barely spoke. When Greg asked if everything was all right, Malik nodded once, then said something strange. You ever get the feeling something's already over, but it just don't know it yet? Greg didn't know how to respond, so he didn't. That haircut ended at 7:52 p.m. Malik swept the floor, walked Greg out, and locked the door behind him. Or so everyone thought. At 8:13 p.m., the lights inside the shop were still on. That's when a neighbor walking his dog saw movement, just a shadow near the back room, passing across the blinds. He didn't think much of it. Probably Malik cleaning up. But the shop was never closed that night. The door was found cracked the next morning. The radio still on. Clippers unplugged but warm. Malik's phone was on the charger. His wallet sat on the counter. No one saw him leave. No one heard a struggle. No alarm was tripped. Just silence. And a half-full bottle of iced tea, slowly warming to room temperature. When the sun came up on April 13th, Turner's Blend was already a question mark in the minds of those who walked past. The open sign still glowed red in the window. The lights were on, flickering faintly behind drawn blinds. Malik's name was still written in grease pencil on the small sandwich board out front. Fades plus lineups today, ask for Malik. But the door was unlocked. That, more than anything, was wrong. By 9 a.m., his first appointment stood outside, shifting from foot to foot in the cold. He waited 10 minutes before pushing the door open. Inside, the silence was dense. No hum of clippers. No low radio playing old soul or late-night jazz. No scent of aftershave or fresh coffee. Just stillness. The customer called out once, twice, no answer. He stepped inside and saw it. The chair facing the mirror, empty. Clippers resting on the tray, unplugged but still warm. A dustpan mid-sweep in the middle of the floor. A phone buzzing silently on the charger. And beside the register, Malik's keys, house, shop, and car, all laid neatly in a dish he never used. His wallet, full, untouched. And on the counter, a half-finished haircut. One side clean and crisp. The other side, raw and uneven. As if the cut had been interrupted halfway through, and no one ever returned to finish it. The man called the police by 10:06 a.m. When they arrived, the response was careful but unhurried. Officers took photos, noted the items left behind, asked a few questions. There was no sign of a break-in, no overturned furniture. No blood, no shattered glass. Just Malik's things, arranged like he planned to come back. The shop was still warm. The thermostat clicked on while the officers stood there. He probably stepped out, one officer said. Stress, maybe. Burnout, could be a personal situation. They asked if Malik had any enemies, any reason to leave. No one could think of one. He didn't drink, didn't do drugs. He had no known medical conditions. His car was still parked out back. The security camera above the door had a blinking red light until it was checked and found to be non-functional, the footage overwritten months ago. The officers labeled it a voluntary disappearance. No signs of foul play. No reason to suspect anything else. A missing person report was filed, but nothing urgent. Nothing coded red. They didn't issue an Amber Alert. No helicopters. No search grids. Just a case number on a clipboard and a slow retreat from the shop. As though silence could be trusted. In the following days, the community filled in the gaps. People walked the alleys behind the shop, knocked on doors, checked hospitals, shelters, even morgues. Rahim, Malik's younger brother, printed hundreds of flyers, taped them to bus stops and utility poles. But the police stayed quiet. They waited. They watched. They suggested maybe Malik had reasons to leave. Maybe there were things people didn't know. But the ones who sat in his chair every week knew better. He wouldn't just walk out. He wouldn't leave with his wallet, his phone, and his keys all untouched. He wouldn't leave a haircut unfinished. That wasn't Malik. That was something else entirely. The buzz was gone. Not just from the clippers, but from the neighborhood itself. A strange quiet settled over the block where Turner's Blend had once breathed life. It wasn't just a barbershop. It had been a pulse. A steady rhythm that matched the beating heart of the community. Now it was an absence loud in its silence. For days after Malik disappeared, the clippers still hummed in people's minds. Phantom sounds. The soft click of scissors, the rustle of the barber cape, the low vibrations of a well-worn trimmer running along a jawline. But in reality, those sounds had vanished. Inside the shop, silence clung to the walls like mildew. Every inch of it felt paused, like Malik had simply stepped into the back for a moment. But the moment never ended. Clients came and stood at the window. Some knocked, others just stared. They couldn't bring themselves to cross the threshold, even when Rahim started opening the doors again a few hours each day. Just to keep the air moving, he said. But it wasn't just about air. It was about memory. About not letting the place die a second death. The chair remained untouched. Malik's chair. Worn leather, polished armrests. A single stray hair clinging to the headrest like a whisper. It sat dead center in the shop, turned slightly left, as if waiting to greet the next customer. No one dared sit in it. Not even Rahim. Not even when he offered free cuts for kids that summer, trying to keep the neighborhood from unraveling. People left things instead. Flowers, candles. A framed photo of Malik smiling, holding up a peace sign. A pair of silver clippers, left by a younger barber who once shadowed him. A faded bull's cap, hung gently from the arm of the chair. Each object, a wordless prayer. The wall by the door became a message board, handwritten notes on notebook paper. "We miss you, bro. Come home. My son's still waiting on that fade." Over time, the ink ran, the tape curled, but no one removed a single piece. Malik's mother came once, quiet, unmoving. She stood in front of the chair for nearly 20 minutes, hands clasped tightly, lips trembling but silent. She didn't cry, she didn't need to. The grief sat in the room like a second presence, heavy and suffocating. When she finally turned to leave, she whispered something no one heard. But Rahim swears the clippers on the counter rattled, just once, as if stirred by her words. Some nights, passers-by swore they saw movement inside, a flicker, a shadow, the blinds shifting without wind. One man, slightly drunk, claimed he heard clippers buzzing faintly just after midnight. He stood across the street, eyes wide, phone out, recording nothing but silence. The shop became legend. A neighborhood shrine. Kids told ghost stories about the chair. Adults told real ones. No one sat in it, but no one let it go either. It remained still, solemn, sacred. As if Malik had somehow become part of it, not just in memory, but in presence. It didn't feel empty. That was the strangest part. It felt like it was waiting. The stillness came slowly, like dust drifting down after a demolition. No loud crash, no single moment of collapse, just the quiet settling of something irreversibly broken. 2 months had passed since Malik vanished, and in that time, the world outside Turner's Blend continued its relentless forward march. Traffic still groaned down the street. The corner store still opened at dawn. Laughter still echoed from the park 2 blocks over. But the shop remained locked in place, as if refusing to move on. Flyers that once fluttered in every window began to peel at the corners. The ink faded from sun and rain, Malik's face becoming a ghost in photocopied gray. Some were torn down entirely. Others had new posters stapled over them, missing dogs, yard sales, a church revival. The urgency drained from the neighborhood, replaced with fatigue. People stopped asking where he was and began wondering why no one had found him. The news cameras that had come in the first week, their vans blocking traffic and their microphones eager for grief, had long since moved on to newer tragedies. The coverage dwindled to a sentence in the back of the paper, buried between weather reports and car crash statistics. Local barber still missing, no new leads. A line, that was all. By late June, the landlord, tired of waiting for rent that would never come, padlocked the shop. The front door was chained, a legal notice slapped on the glass, sharp black letters against red paper. Property reclaimed. All access prohibited. But even locked up, Turner's Blend wasn't empty. Not really. Inside, time began its slow invasion. Dust coated every surface like ash. The once vibrant floor tiles dulled. The mirrors clouded. Sunlight, when it pierced the blinds, felt more like intrusion than illumination. The air grew stale, damp, and beneath the silence, beneath the dust, something began to shift. Not visibly, not tangibly, but undeniably. Rahim came by less often. When he did, he'd stand on the curb and stare at the shop like a puzzle he was no longer strong enough to solve. He spoke less about finding Malik and more about remembering him. His anger dulled into sorrow. His hope calcified into a quiet, bitter ache. He had knocked on doors, called the precinct every week. Pushed, begged, threatened, pleaded. But no one answered anymore. The case had gone cold. So had the city. But some things didn't cool. Some things festered. At night, the building groaned. Not from age, but from something else, something harder to name. Attention. Like the walls themselves were bracing for a truth they couldn't hold back forever. Neighbors who lived above the laundromat next door complained of a smell not constant, but intermittent. Faint, metallic. Others whispered about strange noises, shuffling, dragging, soft thumps against the floor, always after midnight. It was easy to ignore, easier than reopening wounds. The city had already decided Malik had left. Voluntarily, peacefully, even. A man overwhelmed by life who simply stepped away. That's the lie stillness tells, that silence is peace, that emptiness is clean. But beneath Turner's Blend, something waited, something unfinished, something Malik had never intended to leave behind. Stillness isn't the absence of noise, it's the pause before a sound you don't want to hear. Rahim Turner never believed in disappearances without reason. People don't just vanish, not men like Malik. His older brother wasn't the type to run, to leave things undone, to slip silently from a life he had built with his own 2 hands. Malik was steady, predictable. The kind of man who cut his sandwiches into equal halves and aligned his shoes before bed. So when he was gone, truly gone, Rahim felt it like a fracture under the skin. Something invisible but undeniably real. The kind of pain that pulsed when you were still, when the noise around you stopped. In the beginning, Rahim tried to play it straight. He spoke with the detectives, showed up to precinct meetings, handed over family photos and passwords and phone records. He followed their lead, trusted their process. But weeks turned into months, and the calls stopped. The silence became official. A cold case, voluntary disappearance, no foul play suspected. That phrase clung to Rahim like rot. Voluntary. As if Malik had simply tired of being loved. Rahim knew better. He started walking the neighborhood himself, asking questions, first gently, Then with a sharpness that startled even him, he knocked on the doors of neighboring shops, spoke to the clerks, the kids who hung out near the corner, the woman who sold tamales out of a cart 2 blocks down. Most people said the same thing: Malik was a good man, a quiet man. They missed him, but it was the little things that caught Rahim's attention. One man swore he'd seen someone leaving the shop late that night, but not Malik. A taller man, hood pulled low, walking fast. The story came out in fragments, half whispers, the kind of details people convince themselves aren't important until someone asks them 3 times. Another neighbor recalled seeing the back alley dumpster open that week, reeking with something not quite trash. And then there was the camera, the busted one. A security system installed but never updated, its footage looping endlessly, overwriting itself every 24 hours. It had been broken for months, or so they said. Rahim dug deeper. He went back through Malik's old journals, found scribbled notes tucked into drawers, half-finished thoughts about money shorted from the till. Tension with a new client who came in but never spoke. There was a name repeated more than once: Tariq. Not a friend, not a regular, just a presence, a shadow. He started to remember things too. Malik had been more distant that last month, shorter on the phone, vague, distracted. When Rahim had stopped by the shop one evening just before the disappearance, Malik had rushed him out, saying he had something to finish in the back. He'd never done that before. The back room had always been open to Rahim. That night, the door had been closed. The shop, Rahim began to realize, had its own kind of language. Certain drawers stuck more than they used to. The floorboards beneath the barber chair creaked differently. The lock on the back entrance had been replaced, but the receipt for the replacement was never found. He started keeping a journal himself, tracking it all. Details the police ignored. Inconsistencies they didn't question. The deeper he went, the less he recognized the place his brother had loved. It was as though Turner's Blend had been hiding something. Something rotting just beneath the floorboards. And the chair, always untouched, always waiting, seemed less like a symbol of grief and more like a sentinel, like it was guarding something, or daring someone to look closer. Rahim stopped calling it a disappearance. He started calling it what it felt like. A silence someone had worked very hard to create. A silence that wasn't natural. He just didn't know yet what it was trying to cover. Across the street from Turner's Blend, mounted high above the faded awning of a pawn shop, was a security camera that never blinked. Or so everyone thought. It pointed directly toward the barbershop's front door, capturing every delivery, every bus stop lingerer, every late-night straggler. It was the kind of camera no one paid attention to until someone vanished. Rahim discovered it by chance, 2.5 months after Malik disappeared. He was walking the opposite side of the street, retracing steps, letting instinct lead. He looked up and saw the blinking red light, steady, unblinking, watching. He crossed the street and walked into the pawn shop, the bell over the door jangling sharply in the stale air. Inside, under buzzing fluorescent lights, a man named Kenny sat behind the counter, chewing toothpicks and flipping through a sports magazine. Rahim asked about the camera. Kenny squinted, then shrugged. "Yeah, it runs 24/7, motion triggered. Been up there for years." "Do you still have footage from April 12th? Rahim asked. "Man, that's months ago," Kenny said. "System only keeps 90 days unless we back it up." "Why?" Rahim didn't answer. Instead, he pushed. Pressed, explained. Kenny, tired of the attention the shop had already received when reporters had hovered like flies in the first week, reluctantly agreed to let him view what remained. They pulled up the archives. The timestamp showed clear visuals of April 12th. The angle wasn't perfect, slightly obscured by a hanging sign, but the doorway to Turner's Blend was visible. They scrubbed through footage, hour by hour. At 6:57 p.m., Malik could be seen walking a customer to the curb, giving one last handshake, locking the shop door behind them. Then, at 8:07 p.m., the footage jumped. Rahim noticed it immediately. One moment, the street outside was dim, a car rolling past. The next, the timestamp read 8:20 p.m., and the street was still again. No glitch. No blur, just absence, a clean cut. 13 minutes gone. System must have glitched, Kenny said, trying to sound dismissive. But his eyes didn't quite meet Rahim's. No, Rahim said. It didn't. He leaned in closer, rewound. Watched the seconds tick up, smooth and fluid, then blank, not even a flicker. Someone had cut the feed, not corrupted, not lost removed. The missing block was precise. Not 20 minutes, not a general gap. It began at 8:07 and ended at 8:20. That was the window when Malik would have been finishing up. Locking the door. Maybe cleaning, maybe stepping into the back room for the last time. And now, it was a void, a blink in the lens. As if someone had known exactly when to make the world look the other way. Rahim's stomach sank with a cold weight. Accidents didn't feel this clean. System errors weren't this neat. Someone had either accessed the camera system or known someone who could. It meant Malik's disappearance wasn't just bad luck, or a man running from something invisible. It meant someone didn't want him to be seen. It meant there was more to that night, more than anyone had dared imagine. Kenny grew uncomfortable. Said the system sometimes hiccuped. That it wasn't perfect. That maybe Malik just walked away before or after that gap. Rahim left the shop without replying, the door chime ringing behind him like a distant bell toll. He stood outside, staring at the barber shop window across the street. The lights long since dark. The chair still in its place. What happened in those 13 minutes? And more importantly, who made sure no one would ever know? The alley behind Turner's Blend was always a quiet place, even before Malik disappeared. It wasn't the kind of alley that invited traffic narrow, hemmed in by crumbling brick, with dumpsters that overflowed every Sunday, and a strip of cracked pavement that collected more rainwater than it shed. But in the months after Malik vanished, the alley became something else entirely. A place of speculation, of whispered warnings. A place where truth, or something close to it, might have once stood and then vanished. People started talking again. Not loudly, not publicly, but in low voices. Behind closed doors, between drags of cigarettes and over chain-link fences. At first, it was just fragments. A cousin of a friend who said Malik had been stressed before he went missing. A janitor from the school down the street who claimed he saw someone pacing behind the shop the week prior, hood up, hands twitching. But slowly, the fragments formed a shape. And that shape had a name. Tariq. The name slid through the neighborhood like oil, hard to hold, harder to clean up. No one seemed to know his full name, but everyone knew of him. He wasn't from the block, not really. Drifted in maybe a year before Malik disappeared. Started coming around the shop late in the day. Never sat in the waiting chairs, never made appointments. Just showed up. Watched. Sometimes talked low with Malik in the back, near the shampoo sink. Other times they argued, never loud, but with that tight, tense edge people recognize as dangerous. What they talked about, no one knew. Some guessed money. Others said Malik had done him a favor once, something off the books, and now the man wanted more. Too much. There were rumors that Tariq owed people, that he was into things best left unspoken. Drugs, debt collection, something worse. The kind of man who never brought trouble directly, but always seemed to leave traces of it behind. The last confirmed sighting of him came just 5 days before Malik disappeared. A woman who lived above the hardware store, 2 buildings down, told Rahim that she saw them arguing near the back entrance, just after closing. Tariq was animated, hands moving fast, stepping in close. Malik stood stiff, not backing down but not raising his voice either. She didn't hear the words, only the tone. Sharp, cutting. Then they both turned and disappeared through the back door. That was the last time she saw Malik alive. Tarek didn't show up again after April 12th. Not to the shop, not anywhere. His usual haunts went quiet. The corner guys said he skipped town, maybe to Detroit, maybe to somewhere colder. A few claimed he owed someone serious money. Others thought he was lying low. But the timing was too precise to ignore. Rahim tried to bring it to the police, but they waved it off. No last name, no evidence, just rumors. They didn't have the time to chase shadows. But Rahim knew better. In neighborhoods like theirs, shadows were often where the truth hid. Tariq wasn't just some random name. He was a thread. And if Rahim could pull hard enough, maybe just maybe the whole thing would start to unravel. He returned to the alley one evening. Stood in the same place where Malik had argued with the man no one seemed to really know. The air was still, the sun low. A faint wind carried the smell of rotting trash and rusted metal. He looked at the wall where the backlight flickered once before it finally died. He looked at the rear door, and he wondered, had Malik walked back through that door alone? Or had he never made it back through at all? The drawer was small, unassuming, tucked beneath the counter in the back room of Turner's Blend, where Malik kept cleaning supplies, old receipts, and spare clipper guards. It didn't look like much cheap wood. Metal handle worn smooth from years of use. But this drawer had always been different, locked, always. Even from Rahim. Growing up, the brothers had no secrets. They shared clothes, swapped stories, protected each other's lies when needed. But that drawer marked a quiet shift. In the last year, before Malik disappeared, it became off-limits. Rahim remembered asking about it once. Malik had shrugged. Said it was just boring paperwork. The kind of answer that felt practiced and deliberately dull. Rahim had let it go at the time. Malik had earned his privacy. But now, with the shop dark and his brother gone, boring paperwork suddenly felt like a lie. Rahim waited weeks before he broke the lock. Part of him hesitated out of respect. Another part feared what he might find. But something deeper, heavier, wouldn't let him walk away. It wasn't just curiosity. It was necessity. The sense that whatever truth was left about Malik had settled into this small wooden space, waiting to be disturbed. The lock gave with a quiet snap. The drawer creaked as it slid open, resisting slightly, as if it too had grown stiff with silence. Inside, dust danced in the afternoon light. Rahim saw a stack of folded letters, yellowed at the edges. On top of them, a single black envelope, no name, no return address, sealed shut. Beneath that, a photograph. He picked it up carefully. It showed Malik, standing in front of the barber shop, smiling, but not the relaxed smile Rahim knew. This one was guarded, tight. His arm was draped around another man. Taller, broad-shouldered, wearing dark sunglasses, even though the shot looked like it had been taken on a cloudy day. His face was unfamiliar, unreadable, not a client. Not a friend Rahim recognized, and Malik never mentioned him. There was something cold in the image, something wrong. Rahim looked closer. The man's hand rested on Malik's shoulder, but the grip looked too firm, too possessive. Malik's posture wasn't casual, it was stiff, like he'd been told to pose. The background confirmed the date. The old We Cut Kings banner still hung above the door, and Rahim remembered taking it down 6 months before Malik vanished. So the photo was recent. He flipped it over. A handwritten note scrawled in shaky pen. Only keep what you can carry. Rahim set the photo aside and opened the black envelope. Inside, folded twice over, was a single piece of thick, matte paper, a list of names. No explanation, no context. Just names, some crossed out, some circled. One name stood out immediately. Tariq. Rahim's heart beat faster. He sifted through the letters, next some written by Malik, others addressed to him. Most were mundane, business-related, tax documents, invoices. But hidden between them was one short note, clearly not meant for mailing. It read, If something happens, don't trust the first version. Watch the back door and find the photo. The drawer wasn't just a storage space. It was a message. A breadcrumb trail left for someone Malik knew might come looking. Rahim sat on the floor of the back room, surrounded by the pieces of something bigger, something layered, deliberate, unfinished. The clippers on the counter hadn't buzzed in months, but in that moment, the silence in the shop felt newly electric, charged. Malik had been trying to say something. And now, at last, Rahim was finally listening. It had been 2 years and 9 days since Malik Turner vanished. The barber shop, long since boarded up and quiet, had faded into the backdrop of the neighborhood like an abandoned painting, familiar, ignored. Unsettling if you stared too long. Dust coated every window. The red open sign was faded to a dull orange, still half lit from some forgotten connection. People passed by it quickly now. No more flowers, no more candles. Just the memory of absence, heavy and unresolved. The building had changed hands twice in those years. The new owner wanted to gut it. Start fresh. Maybe turn it into a vape shop or a phone repair joint, something cleaner, with no history and quick cash flow. He hired a crew to come in and inspect the pipes, which hadn't been touched since before the pandemic. On a Tuesday morning, just after the sun had burned off the dew, 2 men with steel tools and stiff backs pried open the floor near the back of the shop. They weren't looking for anything but rusted copper. What they found stopped them cold. It started with the smell: wet, sour, metallic. At first, they blamed the mold, the standing water beneath the foundation. But as they broke through a rotted segment of flooring, something shifted beneath their shovels. Not metal, not clay. Something that thudded, but gave way like meat. One of the men knelt down, peeled back a layer of dirt, and uncovered black tarp, thick, industrial, bound with duct tape now decayed at the edges. He shouted for his partner. Together, they cleared more debris. Then they saw it. A curve of pale bone, not random, not animal. The unmistakable crescent of a human spine, curled unnaturally, as though trapped mid-prayer. The police arrived within the hour. Yellow tape went up around the perimeter, fluttering against the wind like tired wings. Neighbors watched from windows. A few stepped outside and stared from across the street in silence. No one said the name out loud, but everyone thought it. Malik. The body was exhumed slowly, carefully. Wrapped in the tarp were partial remains, ribs, spine, fragments of clothing too rotted to identify clearly. No ID, no shoes, no jewelry. But a single item had survived the decay. A gold wristwatch, face cracked, band still intact. It was Malik's. A birthday gift from Rahim 5 years before the disappearance. Custom engraving on the back. Time of death was impossible to determine. The body had decomposed too far, sealed in soil and darkness. But it was clear the burial hadn't been an accident. The floor had been cut open, filled in, sealed back without disturbance. Whoever had done it knew the shop, knew its rhythms, knew when it would be quiet. The coroner ruled the cause of death inconclusive. No clear trauma, no gunshot, no blunt force. But the bones told a story of pressure, something tight, compressed. Asphyxiation was a possibility. The mystery remained intact, but now it had a shape, now it had a presence. Rahim was notified that night. He didn't speak when they told him, just closed his eyes and nodded once. He had known, not officially, not in words, but in his bones, in his dreams, in the way the clippers had stopped buzzing like they once did. He had known. They found Malik, but they did not find peace. They found a body without a grave, and a truth still buried. The confirmation came in the form of a phone call, a voice too clinical, too rehearsed, relaying the kind of truth that should come wrapped in silence. DNA matched. The remains were Malik Turner's. There was no doubt, not a theory, not a question, just fact. The man who vanished behind the warm hum of clippers, who poured his life into a leather barber's chair, had been beneath the floor all along. Rahim sat in his apartment, the phone still pressed to his ear long after the line went dead. No words came, no tears, just the hollow weight of knowing. It wasn't closure. It wasn't justice. It was a wound with a name now, and that changed everything. The coroner's report arrived 2 days later. Rahim was given a copy, printed in sterile black ink on crisp white paper, its language cold, exacting. No visible blunt force trauma. No bullet entry or exit wounds. No sharp force injuries present. Toxicology negative for narcotics, alcohol, or foreign substances. The body was incomplete, too far gone to offer a full story. Bones spoke, but not clearly. Not this time. There was one detail, though. A faint compression pattern along the ribs and spine. Subtle, but present. The kind of constriction seen in some cases of asphyxiation manual, perhaps, or suffocation under pressure. No bruising remained, no internal hemorrhaging. But the bones had curled inward in a way that told their own quiet story. It wasn't peaceful, it wasn't natural. Malik hadn't simply laid down and died. Something had taken the air from his lungs and never given it back. The report called it undetermined cause of death. Rahim read those words over and over, as if repetition could give them meaning. But it only deepened the ache. How does a man end up under the floor of his own barber shop without a single wound? How does someone vanish, get buried within walls they knew better than their own home, and leave behind no trace but a locked drawer, a photograph, and silence? Police reopened the case, but with hesitation. No suspects, no camera footage, no signs of forced entry. And 2 years had passed, 2 long years of footprints erased by time, of names forgotten, of witnesses who had moved or vanished themselves. It had become a cold case twice over, first in theory, now in fact. The discovery of Malik's body offered no new evidence, only new grief. Rahim started sleeping in shorter bursts. Dreams came, sharp and fast images of Malik trapped beneath floorboards, pounding against wood no one could hear through. He imagined the moment the floor had been sealed, the sound of dirt settling where breath should have been. He couldn't shake the thought, someone had been in that shop with him. Someone had watched him die. And yet, the shop had never screamed. The clippers had never dropped. The lights had stayed on. Rahim sat with the report one last time, then folded it in half and slid it into a drawer. He didn't need it to remember. He knew what silence could hide. And now, he knew what it could bury. Malik was dead. But the truth was still alive. And it was still hiding. They returned to the barber shop in the early hours of the morning, long after the streetlights had flickered out and the city had tucked itself into uneasy slumber. The front door groaned open under the weight of old air, and the smell that greeted them was still thick with time dust, aged wood, the lingering trace of talcum powder. But now, there was something else in the air too. Something sharper, metallic, memory mixed with rot. The investigators moved carefully. 2 years had gone by, and the shop had become more shrine than scene. Still, the discovery of Malik's body beneath the floor demanded a second look this time, with no assumptions, no overlooked details. They set up the equipment in silence, speaking only when necessary. And then they turned to the chair. It stood exactly as it always had, centered in the room, facing the mirror that no longer reflected much of anything. The black leather was dulled from neglect, cracked in the seat where years of weight had pressed into it. Dust clung to its arms. To the untrained eye, it was just a chair. But the air around it felt heavy, as if the room itself was holding its breath. They sprayed the luminol slowly, carefully, letting the fine mist settle across the chair's surface and the floor beneath. The lights were killed. The UV lamp clicked on. What lit up was not what they expected. Smears began to glow, faint, ghostly blue along the arms of the chair. The backrest too, more on the underside. But the highest concentrations, the places where the glow pulsed strongest, were clustered at the base, around the metal footplate, beneath the seat, where blood would have dripped, unseen. Where it might have pooled, slowly, if someone had been struggling, if someone had been dying. No signs of this had been visible before. No stains, no dried trails. Someone had cleaned the chair well, perhaps meticulously. But luminol doesn't lie. And what it revealed now painted a new picture. This wasn't just where Malik worked. It might have been where he was killed. The investigators moved closer. They tested the floorboards again. Pulled up a few, listened to the creak that Rahim had mentioned months before. There was a gap, a slight one where the boards didn't align properly. A repair done hastily, maybe even in the hours after his death. They swabbed the glowing spots, sent samples to the lab, but in their eyes the story was already beginning to form. The shop had always felt too still, too perfectly preserved. Now, that stillness felt deliberate. Someone had taken great care to make Malik disappear without a trace, to make the chair seem ordinary, just another tool of the trade. But they hadn't accounted for time, or for what the walls remembered. What the floor soaked in. What even silence, in its own way, held on to. Rahim stood outside as the team worked, arms crossed, jaw set. He hadn't gone inside this time. He didn't need to. He'd always suspected the truth had started in that chair. Now he knew. Malik's last moments didn't happen somewhere else. They happened here. Where he welcomed the neighborhood. Where he cut generations of hair. Where he made people feel seen. And where, in the end, no one saw him at all. They found him in Detroit, living under a name that didn't belong to him. Devin Reed, according to the lease. A 2-room apartment above a boarded-up laundromat. The kind of place that didn't ask questions, and didn't answer them either. The neighborhood was quiet in a way that felt tense, like the silence came not from peace, but from people who knew better than to speak too loudly. Tariq had been gone for nearly 2 years, long enough to almost become myth back in Chicago. A ghost tied to Malik Turner's disappearance, spoken of in alley whispers and cautious glances. But he wasn't dead. He wasn't missing. He was just hiding. The arrest wasn't dramatic. No chase, no confrontation. Just a quiet knock at the door, the echo of boots in a narrow stairwell. When he opened it, he didn't look surprised, only tired. His eyes were sunken, his beard unkempt, but his posture still carried that rigid alertness. The kind of tension that doesn't fade with time, only burrows deeper into the spine. In custody, Tariq didn't ask why he was being questioned. He didn't mention Malik's name, not at first. He offered his new identity, his address, said he'd been in Detroit since early 2023. When pressed, he claimed he left Chicago because of a bad deal gone worse, some money owed to the wrong people, a near miss with a crew he wouldn't name. It had nothing to do with Malik, he said. He barely knew the man. Just got his hair cut there a few times. Friendly conversation, nothing more. But lies rarely hold clean edges. And in a moment he didn't even seem to recognize as a mistake, Tariq slipped. He was talking about the shop, about how busy it used to be on weeknights. A throwaway comment, casual. Then he said it. I mean, the guy always kept his keys in that little metal dish near the register, easy to miss. The room went still. The metal dish. That detail had never been released. Not in news reports, not in Rahim's statements, not even in the coroner's report. It was one of those details the police had kept close, something they used to measure truth against fabrication. And Tariq had just offered it unprompted, as if describing a scene he'd watched from the inside. When questioned, he backpedaled quickly. Claimed he must have seen it during one of his cuts. Maybe a coincidence, maybe he was wrong, but the damage was already done. The mask of distance he'd worn began to crack, bit by bit. He stopped answering some questions entirely, asked for a lawyer. The denial stayed firm, but the air around him changed. He wasn't untouchable anymore. He was known. Back in Chicago, Rahim heard the news through a late-night call. He didn't speak for a full minute, just breathed into the receiver like he was waiting for the earth to shift beneath him. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "Good," he said. "Now make him talk." But Tariq didn't confess. He didn't explain. He didn't cry, didn't rage. He sat behind a cold metal table and stared past the walls like they were closing in slow. He knew something. That much was certain. And for the first time in 2 years, the story had a face again. A man who vanished just when Malik did. A man who returned only when he thought no one would care anymore. But someone still did. Someone always would. The photograph had haunted Rahim from the moment he first unfolded it. Malik, half smiling in front of the barber shop, and beside him, the man with the sunglasses. Too tall, too stiff, too silent. An arm around Malik's shoulders that read more like control than comfort. A stranger, a presence. Rahim had studied the photo countless times, memorized every wrinkle in Malik's shirt, every blurred edge in the background. But the other man, he was a blank. No name, no records, no leads. For months, the image had remained a wall with no door. Until someone online found the handle. It started with a Reddit post Rahim made in desperation. He uploaded the photo cropped, grainy, timestamp removed and asked, "Does anyone recognize this man? Taken in Chicago, 2022. Possible connection to disappearance." It wasn't a long shot. It was a scream into the digital void. But someone heard it. 3 days later, a user with the handle @BorealisTruth messaged him directly. She was a digital sleuth, part-time coder, part-time conspiracy archivist, and she believed she'd seen the man before. Not recently, not in the news, in old footage. Grainy security stills tied to another missing persons case from 2019. South Side, a teenage boy, never found. Rahim asked for proof. She sent over a still image pulled from a bank's exterior camera. A man, tall, broad, same dark sunglasses, same rigid posture, walking just ahead of a boy who would vanish that same night. The resemblance was uncanny. Rahim's stomach turned. Her name was Lila. Over the next week, she dug deeper, cross-referencing city employee records, old newspapers, even grainy YouTube uploads from community events. The man in the photo had a name. Richard Avery. Former CPD, badge number now decommissioned, retired early under medical grounds after a departmental review in 2017. No public allegations, no disciplinary action. Just a quiet exit from the force. But what followed was darker. Avery had reappeared less than a year later, working in the shadows. Not officially, never on the books, but always nearby. Private firms, freelance surveillance, security consultation for businesses that didn't want to involve the police. His name never led investigations, but it floated near them. Disappearances, mostly. Men, young boys, one woman. All cases unsolved. All from lower-income neighborhoods. All within a 40-mile radius of South Chicago. And then the most chilling part. Most of the files tied to Avery's name were sealed. Not just archived, sealed. Court documents, internal memos, even neighborhood watch complaints filed by civilians. Rahim tried to request them. Denied. Lila sent an FOIA appeal. Denied again. No explanation. No pathway. The deeper they looked, the darker it became. Avery had connections in city offices. A history of being useful and cleaning up messes no one wanted public. A fixer. The kind you didn't hire, you were told to use. The kind that didn't work with people like Malik, unless there was something to clean up. Rahim stared at the photo for hours that night. Malik's smile now felt like a mask. The arm around him like a leash. What had his brother gotten caught up in? What debt had been called in? And why was a man like Avery anywhere near Turner's Blend? It was no longer a photograph. It was a warning. And Raheem feared he'd only just begun to understand what Malik had been up against. In the weeks after the truth began to surface, fragmented, shadowed, but undeniable, the neighborhood changed. Not in a way outsiders could name. The barber shop was still boarded up. The corner store still sold the same cigarettes and cheap beer. Kids still played ball in the street, dodging cars and shouting each other's names into dusk. But something subtle shifted. It was in the way people glanced over their shoulders. The way conversations stopped mid-sentence when the wrong name came up. The way the barber shop, once just a sealed relic, now felt like a pressure point in the middle of the block. Like a wound no one knew how to bandage. People started to talk again, but the words were different now. Less curiosity, more fear. What had Malik known? What had he seen? Was he silenced? Or did he try to speak and no one listened? Theories spread like smoke. Maybe the shop had become a front used by people who operated beneath the surface of things. Those who needed a quiet place to move money, to clean it, to make things disappear. Maybe Malik found out. Maybe he tried to push back. Some said he had refused to play along. That he had drawn a line, told someone no when they expected obedience. And for that, he paid a price. Others whispered of something even darker. That Malik had been holding on to secrets not just for himself, but for others. That he'd been made the keeper of things too dangerous to speak aloud. That the barbershop wasn't just a business. It was a vault, a meeting point, a listening post, a place where deals were brokered in low tones, where names were never used, only nodded toward. And Malik, always observant, always quiet, had started to understand too much. But there were also those who resisted the rumors, who clung to the man they remembered. The barber who knew every kid's birthday, who cut the preacher's hair for free, who fixed a broken bike chain on his lunch break. They didn't want to believe he was caught in something criminal, something deadly. To them, those stories felt like excuses, ways to lessen the weight of what really happened. That Malik had been taken from them, not by misstep or mistake, but by deliberate, cold intention. Raheem, caught between all of it, felt adrift. Every theory stabbed at his grief in a different way. He wanted truth, but he also wanted peace. And the more he uncovered, the more he realized the two might never come together. Because even with the body found, even with Tarek's slip, even with the photograph now pointing fingers at someone who shouldn't have existed in Malik's world, the answers were still fractured. Officially, the case remained open. Unsolved. Malik's death, unexplained. A man beneath a barber shop floor with no visible wounds, no known enemies, no clear cause. People passed the shop now without looking, as if even acknowledging it might summon something, or worse, implicate them. No one wanted to say the wrong thing, to remember the wrong detail. In a city that had learned to survive by silence, remembering too clearly was dangerous. The tragedy wasn't just in what was lost. It was in what remained. The echoes. The questions. The feeling that something had lived right there in plain sight, danger dressed in familiarity, and no one had seen it until it was too late. Raheem reopened the barber shop on a gray morning in March. The sky hung low, the wind dragged litter across the sidewalk, and the door creaked like it had been holding its breath for too long. The padlock came off with a snap. The boards were taken down, the dust cleared, the counters wiped until they shone again. But not everything was cleaned. Not everything was restored. Malik's chair, the one in the center, the one that had held decades of stories and laughter and trust, remained untouched. Raheem polished it, but he didn't move it, didn't turn it, didn't sit in it. The cracks in the leather were still there, like veins. The base, scrubbed with care, still bore the faintest outline of something that could never be named aloud. It sat empty not by accident, but by decision, a choice that no one questioned. When the door opened that morning, the first client was a man in his 60s who used to come in every 2 weeks like church. He stepped inside, took off his cap, and looked around. His eyes paused on the chair, then on Rahim, then on the floor. He didn't ask what happened, he didn't need to. He just said softly, "It's good to have this place back," and took the second chair by the wall. More followed in the coming weeks. Fathers with sons, old friends, strangers who had never met Malik but had heard the story and wanted to support what had been lost. They didn't ask about the past. They asked for cuts, for lineups, for fades, and they gave Rahim quiet nods when he handed them the mirror. There were no jokes yet, no loud banter, not like before. The shop breathed, but the air was heavier now, reverent, as if everyone inside knew they were stepping into a sacred place, one built from memory and sealed with pain. And always, Malik's chair stood silent, like a witness no one dared cross-examine. No one sat in it, not even by accident. A few times, a child would approach it, curious, and their parent's hand would shoot out quick, pulling them back with a soft, "Not that one." It wasn't explained. It didn't need to be. The chair had become something else entirely. A ghost seat. A boundary between the world that was and the one that continued despite it. Rahim often found himself staring at the mirror across from it. In those quiet moments between clients, when the radio faded and the clippers cooled, he'd look at the reflection and see two chairs, one filled, one not, one still humming with life, the other echoing something deeper. Sometimes, in the reflection, he swore he saw Malik, not as a specter, not as a haunting, just a presence, a reminder, his outline soft, almost imagined, a hand on the shoulder, a smile that never quite reached the eyes. Rahim didn't speak to it, but he nodded sometimes, quietly, respectfully, like a brother still cutting hair beneath a legacy too heavy to name. The barber shop was open again. The chairs spun. The clippers buzzed. The laughter was returning, slowly, like the sun peeking through a long winter. But evil doesn't always leave when the story ends. Sometimes it lingers. It folds itself into the seams of a leather seat. It hides in the silence between jokes. It stares back at you through a mirror, smiling with someone else's teeth. And still, Malik's chair remained. Empty. Watching. The barbershop glowed in amber, washed in the soft light of a sun sinking low behind the city skyline. Outside, the streets hushed beneath the weight of approaching dusk. Inside, Turner's Blend exhaled slowly, as if the walls themselves were releasing years of breath held too long. Dust hung in the golden beams like memory suspended in the air. The clippers were silent. The laughter of the day had faded into echoes. The door was locked, the chairs empty, except one. Malik's chair. It sat untouched beneath the window, soaked in fading light, the cracked leather shining faintly, like it had absorbed every story ever told within these walls and kept them sacred. No one sat in it, not today, not ever. And yet it didn't feel vacant. It felt full, heavy, alive in a way that defied reason. As if time never left it. As if the man who once stood behind it, hand steady, eyes kind, had never truly stepped away. The mirror across from it reflected only light now. No faces, no motion, just the orange glow of goodbye. But beneath that, beneath the glass, there was something else. Not an image, but a presence. Not seen, but felt. A weight, soft but steady, like someone watching, like someone remembering. Rahim had closed up half an hour earlier. He didn't sweep near that chair. He never did. He turned off the lights slowly, one by one, until only the golden wash from outside remained. The clippers sat on the counter, unplugged but lined up neatly, as if Malik might still reach for them. Sometimes, Rahim would whisper good night as he passed. Not to the shop, not to the room, but to the space between the space that Malik once filled, and somehow still did. Outside, the sky dimmed. Shadows stretched across the sidewalk. Inside, the last light pooled at the foot of the chair, casting long, soft streaks across the floorboards that had once covered a secret now unearthed. The chair stood like a monument, a gravestone without earth, a memory that refused to fade. There were no answers carved into the wood, no final confessions in the silence, but there was something deeper than resolution. A presence that clung to every reflection, to every breath of air that passed through the cracked doorframe. The camera pulls back slowly. The room darkens, and in a voice not tied to a face, not to Rahim or any one person, but to the story itself, something speaks not in sound, but in feeling. In the quiet hum of clippers, in the mirror that saw too much, he is still there, waiting.